Self-driving cars were supposed to end traffic jams forever. But what if they actually make everything worse? You've probably seen the promises about autonomous vehicles solving all our urban problems, eliminating crashes, reducing congestion, while creating a seamless mobility utopia for everyone. Analysts say well over $100 billion has gone into autonomy, with some industry tallies around $160 billion when you include big tech and automakers, all promising safer roads and smoother cities. But here's the thing. As these vehicles are finally hitting real streets in places like San Francisco and Phoenix, we're seeing something nobody really talks about. The way it's being deployed could actually push us toward more car-dependent cities while increasing overall vehicle usage. So self-driving cars could change our cities, and not necessarily in the way we want. With how current economic incentives are structured, deployment tends to prioritize private profits ahead of public spaces. We're at a critical moment where the rules we set now will determine whether autonomous vehicles actually serve people or whether we end up serving them. And honestly, the window to get this right is closing fast. So let's talk about what's actually operating on the streets today. Driverless rides do exist in a handful of US cities. Waymo runs paid robo-taxi service in Phoenix, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Cruise, which operated in San Francisco and other markets, suspended US operations in October 2023 after a crash in which a pedestrian was dragged under one of their vehicles.
Trapped underneath the Cruise vehicle on Monday night. It's a first for police and fire departments involving a driverless car.
The victim was found to be...
These services aren't set and forget automation. They use remote assistance monitoring for edge cases when the software gets confused by construction, emergency scenes, or odd markings. In fact, Cruise has stated its cars initiate a remote assist session roughly every 4 to 5 miles, with humans actively assisting about 2 to 4% of the time. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has documented nearly 4,000 incidents involving autonomous vehicles and driver assistance systems from August 2019 through June 2024. Tesla vehicles accounted for about 54% of these reports, including crashes with stationary emergency vehicles and those phantom braking episodes that caused rear-end collisions. There was this particularly tragic case in Tempe, Arizona, where an Uber test vehicle struck and killed a pedestrian after its software repeatedly misclassified her and the automatic emergency braking was disabled in test mode. These systems can work well in controlled environments, but they struggle with the unpredictable complexity of real city streets, especially when emergency responders need access, or when weather conditions mess with their sensors. Understanding why autonomous vehicles are being deployed despite these limitations requires you to follow the money. Well over $160 billion has been invested in autonomous vehicle development, creating substantial pressure to scale quickly and recover those investments. This financial pressure influences everything from technology timelines to lobbying strategies. Companies need to demonstrate progress to investors, which means getting vehicles on streets and lobbying for lighter regulations that speed deployment. The marketing emphasizes safety benefits, while the business incentives push toward maximizing market share and vehicle miles traveled, which may not align with creating walkable, transit-first cities. The truth is, private companies profit from every mile driven and every ride taken. This creates a tension with the public goals of reducing car dependency. Under the current incentives, this rush to deploy means testing happens on public streets with real people, essentially transferring risks and costs to communities while companies capture the profits. The safety argument for autonomous vehicles focuses almost entirely on sensors and software, which doesn't capture the full picture of how traffic safety actually works. Even if autonomous vehicles outperform average human drivers, that's still a big IF. They introduce these novel failure modes that human drivers don't have, like misclassifying objects, phantom braking, or getting confused by unusual road markings. Meanwhile, the biggest safety improvements globally have come from street design, not vehicle technology. Countries like Sweden and the Netherlands have dramatically safer roads because their streets are designed differently. Vision Zero principles focus on things like lower speed limits, protected intersections, and infrastructure that makes crashes less likely and less severe when they do occur. If US roads were to match Sweden's safety record, fatalities could drop by roughly over 80% without any new vehicle technology. Protected bike lanes, raised crosswalks, and traffic calming measures have long track records of reducing injuries and deaths. The obsession with high-tech solutions can distract us from these approaches that work regardless of who or what is driving. You don't need artificial intelligence to save lives. You need better street design. Here's the challenge with the traffic reduction promise. When you make driving easier, you typically get more driving. That pattern has a name, induced demand, and transportation research has documented it for decades. Increased capacity or convenience encourages people to take more trips, which ultimately makes them drive farther. Autonomous vehicles could potentially increase this induced demand by making car trips more appealing. If you can work, sleep, or watch movies during your commute, suddenly living farther from the city center becomes attractive, increasing vehicle miles traveled. Without parking needs, empty autonomous vehicles might cruise continuously rather than sitting still, adding ghost traffic with no passengers. We've already seen this pattern with ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. Often, these services generate new trips rather than just replacing existing ones. Autonomous vehicles would likely amplify this effect dramatically. The induced demand issue becomes even more concerning when you consider how autonomous vehicles might accelerate suburban sprawl. If commuting becomes a productive time where you can work or relax, the costs of living farther from city centers decrease significantly. This could trigger large-scale suburban expansion, forcing cities to build expensive new infrastructure to serve spread-out development. Historically, infrastructure tends to follow sprawl, requiring new roads, utilities, schools, and emergency services across wider areas. Autonomous vehicles could repeat this pattern at an unprecedented scale, creating fiscal crises for cities trying to serve increasingly dispersed populations. As autonomous vehicles scale, companies will likely lobby for infrastructure changes that benefit their business models. This includes dedicated autonomous vehicle lanes, curbside space for pickups and drop-offs, and traffic signal priority for autonomous vehicles over transit. Autonomous vehicle-only lanes reduce space for buses, bikes, and general traffic. Curbside pickup zones eliminate parking that could become bike lanes or sidewalk extensions. Signal priority for private autonomous vehicles over public transit can undermine the efficiency advantages that make buses and trains viable. We've seen this pattern before. In the early 20th century, streetcar networks connected American cities efficiently until they were systematically dismantled to make room for private automobiles. Once infrastructure changes to accommodate one mode of transportation, reversing those changes becomes politically and financially challenging. Autonomous vehicle companies promise rides could be cheaper in the long run without human drivers, but this overlooks some basic market dynamics. Once competition thins and companies achieve market dominance, they can raise prices to maximize profits rather than minimize costs. We've already seen this playbook with ride-sharing platforms. Companies like Uber and Lyft initially used venture capital to subsidize cheap rides, undercutting taxis and public transit. Once competitors were eliminated and users became dependent, they raised prices and added fees. Autonomous vehicle companies appear to be following a similar strategy, using massive investments to undercut existing transportation options before extracting profits through higher prices. Cities that allow autonomous vehicles to displace public transit and walking infrastructure risk creating dependency on private services they can't control or afford. To keep autonomous vehicles moving efficiently, cities might implement changes that could negatively impact street life and walkability. This might include fencing to prevent pedestrians from crossing streets unpredictably, higher speed limits to improve autonomous vehicle throughput, and grade-separated infrastructure that prioritizes vehicle flow over human-scale streets. These changes can create environments that are hostile to walking, cycling, and street-level commercial activity. Faster, heavier autonomous vehicles increase noise from tires and brakes, while making crashes more deadly for anyone outside a vehicle. The physics haven't changed. Higher speeds still mean more severe injuries and deaths when crashes occur. The result could be cities carved up by autonomous vehicle expressways, forcing people to rely on paid transportation services for basic mobility while destroying the public spaces that make urban life appealing. Some cities already have tools that work, with a common theme: prioritization of people over vehicles, and creation of transportation systems that align with public goals rather than private profits. First, implement modal filters and access limits that restrict where cars, including autonomous vehicles, can operate. Barcelona's superblock route traffic around neighborhood cores while keeping emergency access, opening space for public life and local business. Second, lower speed limits citywide and remove urban freeway segments where feasible, prioritizing safety over vehicle throughput. Oslo recorded 1 total traffic death in 2019 and 0 pedestrian cyclist deaths. Helsinki reported years with 0 pedestrian deaths, achieved with slower speeds and redesigned streets. Third, stop building parking, especially surface lots that waste valuable urban land, and reform zoning to allow dense, mixed-use development where daily needs are walkable or bikeable. Parking requirements can force sprawl and car dependency by mandating space for vehicles rather than people. Fourth, invest heavily in protected walking and cycling infrastructure that connects to frequent, reliable public transit. The Netherlands demonstrates how comprehensive cycling networks can handle transportation needs efficiently, while improving public health and reducing emissions. Fifth, build dedicated transit lanes for buses, trams, and trains under public control, protecting these space-efficient modes from being crowded out by private vehicles. Cities like Bogota show how bus rapid transit with dedicated lanes can move more people than highways while costing far less. Finally, price driving through congestion charges or vehicle miles, traveled fees to prevent autonomous vehicles from cruising empty and clogging streets. Cities like London, Stockholm, and Singapore show congestion pricing works, reducing traffic while generating revenue for public transportation. Sometimes the biggest obstacles to progress are in our own assumptions about how cities should work. Better cities are possible. We just have to choose to build them. Tell me in the comments, what's one street near you that should be redesigned first to prioritize people over cars?